All right, I'm Adrian Stanley, one of the program committee members. Welcome to the flash session Refocused. Really, when we were sort of organizing this session and panel, a lot of conferences have the innovative startup pitch sessions, which are really useful to get to know startups, but we couldn't sort of find enough, or we couldn't decide which startups would be best and how to do it. So we thought we'd change this on its head, and we brought a group of sort of expert panelists from very different backgrounds to look at sort of from an investor analyst perspective of what's happening in the industry, new technologies. So I'd really love your feedback if this sort of approach works. It's changed things up from other conferences, or perhaps you still like the startups and the innovation. Yeah, I'm with Jeremiah Publications. We do a number of innovative things, but I was previously working at Digital Science as their managing director, so I guess I either went to the dark side or the light side of whichever way you look at it. But I'll do very quick introductions. We're going to do a little like the researcher session yesterday, sort of interactive. So if you have questions, the speakers are going to, we've had some really amazing dialogues on the planning calls, so we're going to try and keep it interactive. And if someone says something and then someone else prompts, so raise your hand if something resonates and you want to just add a point to it or you have a question. But I'll introduce very briefly from the end there, Letty Conrad. Hopefully most of you know Letty, but she's the VP and Senior Analyst at Outsell. So Outsell every year do a top 50 emerging companies, and one of the things we want to sort of look at in this session is the sort of methodology too that different companies and people use for assessing new interesting innovations and tech. Steve Scott was, I believe, number 3 employee at Digital Science, and he's the director of the portfolio manager. So I think most of you know Digital Science now, but some 13, 16 different portfolio companies now under the umbrella, and some brands like Altmetric. And then we're lucky to have Jessica Seabuck from Wiley. She's talking kind of broadly on Wiley, but also on the Wiley Partner Solutions too, and what they've done to build a group of innovative companies together, the likes of Atipon and J&J Editorial. And then we have Deepika Bajaj, sorry, I always get this wrong. Deepika came from our industry originally, but has been outside of our industry working for some VC investors and doing some global innovation, being a judge on some startup panels and that. So these are the sort of sharks we've got, or Dragon's Den if you call it in the UK, the experts. I'm going to hand it over to sort of Letty to sort of introduce how Outsell and her look at sort of innovation and analysis of new technologies. And then she's going to hand to Steve.
We will be very organized, but also very interactive. So yeah, do shout out if you have thoughts. So for those who I haven't met, I'm Letty Conrad, VP and lead analyst for scholarly communications at Outsell, brand spanking new. And so this was my first year helping with the Emerging 50 exercise. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the specific attributes and methodology, but the purpose is to help across the information and data sectors, where scholarly communications is one. Each analyst highlights 5 to 10, and then we pull them together and collect a lot of data and put together what come out as the top 50 to highlight newcomers. Where are people innovating? Where are the startups focused? Who are potential disruptors? Where are their potential partners? Who's solving what problems where? And so this report is fairly high level, and it's meant to really start a conversation. We publish this list every year with the focus of, really wanting to both spotlight these newcomers, but also start conversations around, what do you think? Can you see an application for this? Have you heard about these people? Have you seen this in action? So really wanting to, create a dialogue within the industries across the sectors that we cover, legal, finance, media, marketing, et cetera. And so within scholarly communications, one of the things that we've seen in that report is a couple of different trends. Of course, AI is hot. A lot of AI is coming through that report, but also really simple sorts of things like platforms for collaboration. I think about the Scientify Research platform. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's essentially a collaboration and grant finder platform, but it's solving problems that we haven't been able to, hit the nail on the head yet. So a lot of these companies are focused on, really getting into the weeds as far as what problems need to be solved and where tech and services can make that happen. So I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, let me know. I'm happy to tell you more detail later. Yeah, that's my quick intro.
And just to add, Letty, I know you just mentioned earlier that you've seen at least a couple of companies here that interest you that could get on next year's list.
Yes, that's true. Absolutely.
That's good from the session. So,
yeah, no, and we're always looking at it. We'd step myself notes. Next year's report, want to look at a couple of different folks. So yeah, thank you.
So I'm Steve Scott, Director of Portfolio Development at Digital Science, and as Adrian said, I've been with the company since before day one. We were a year in stealth. Digital Science, I'm sure hopefully you all know, but it was an interesting formation spun out of Nature Publishing Group. It was set up by predominantly Annette Thomas, and who was CEO of Macmillan at the time, and Timo Hanni, who was the managing Nature.com at the time, to be an innovation unit, but an innovation unit within a corporate environment with a difference in the sense that it wasn't just hand-picked people from the organization told to go in a room and be innovative. Anyway, I think the formation of Digital Science is what has led to its success in the sense that it was set up within a corporate environment by arm's length. And by arm's length, I mean not just physically, but operationally. So by that, what I mean is HR, legal, finance within the parent company were not the HR, legal, finance that we depended on. So we could move fast and break things at arm's length. And I think that's a testament to Annette and Timo's vision at the time. And I think interesting, hopefully for the conversation later, to talk about that in terms of how publishers are looking at doing innovation internally. So we're 12 years old. We have 12 companies in the portfolio, so we're not prolific in terms of investment. But the reason for that is because we very much take a portfolio approach to our investment. So by that, what I mean is, does the company we're looking at, does it bring value to our portfolio, and does our portfolio bring value to it? So rather than just writing a check, it's much more in depth. And when we get on to the discussion about how we evaluate companies, as you mentioned, Letty, our top one is synergy, that horrible word, but synergy with the portfolio. And one of the things I do a lot is when I'm talking to founders is I ask them to tell me where they see the opportunities within the portfolio to work with them. And that's either data, features, access to markets, and so on. So I'll stop there.
Yep. Hi, I'm Jessica Sibiak. I'm Vice President for Global Government Partnerships and Public Policy for Wiley. My title probably indicates that I bring somewhat of a different lens to these topics. That's sort of my bailiwick. As Adrian mentioned, I'd like to talk a little bit about Wiley's Partner Solutions. And of course, Wiley is a long-established entity, and Partner Solutions is to some degree, or the way I conceptualize it at least, it's a little bit of a startup innovative mentality. And so, among other things, we're coupling scale and our longstanding expertise with some more innovative and customer-focused and really technology-driven approaches, which is, we think, creating opportunities, not just for Wiley, of course, but for all of our customers and others. And I'm happy to speak in a little bit more depth about that as the panel goes on.
Yeah, that's good. And I think one point to make too, and for everyone in the room, it isn't just about startups. There's a lot of innovation with all of you, and it's here. So companies like Adipon are doing a number of things with AI and others. But yeah.
Gosh, it's good to be back. I love this crowd. Almost like leaving the industry and the pandemic, like 4 years, 5 years later, feels like I'm meeting you in another dimension. So my name is Deepika, and I actually am working with private equity companies, helping them scale and find commercialization so that they can then go to market. So that's called the GTM, if you were wondering what that means. What I find is, having worked in this industry, growing RedLink and then post-acquisition of Adapone and RedLink with Wiley, well, one of the old adages that publishing industry doesn't innovate, but I found the most innovative, open-minded, collaborative people, and I was talking to Steve just a couple of seconds ago. One of the digital science, all portfolio companies worked very openly and transparently to drive innovation at the time when I was here. I think it's just a time of, again, taking up that baton, a couple of things that I've noticed, and I just want to share my observations from the conversations in the last 2 days, that, again, there's a lot of interest in the AI and what it can mean. And then there is a lot of other small players who are coming in, creating that innovation. But I would like to see how do we make this as a service that, what about AI can be more applicable? So I see that the value could be in personalization, like personalization AI. Content, can we get away from PDF and have video content that actually AI generates, or things of that nature? And I love your perspective on it. So I bring that outside perspective and hope to get your minds thinking about some cool ways as we look at how we will innovate and collaborate in the next phase of growth for the industry.
So unless anybody has any burning questions to start with, one of the things I wanted to ask the panel and we were talking about was, given the theme of this sort of conference is open and trusted at scale, what sort of initiatives do you see that's happening out there? And I think another sort of interesting question for us as a whole group is, where does the industry come together on things like the Integrity Hub against where are innovative new products and companies sort of popping up? So anyone want to take that first?
Yeah, I can jump on that. So like we were talking a bit in the planning calls, research integrity does seem to be a really key area of innovation at the moment. And I think it's one of those examples of, where innovation is helping to solve real world problems. And that's, that's really what I would underscore. You're gonna hear that a couple of different times from me today. That we're not just innovating for innovation's sake, that we're really, looking to improve the researcher experience, scale, create efficiencies. One of the things that you can see when you look at the Emerging 50 report from Outsell is across the sectors, where are those problems? What are the areas that folks are investing? And research integrity, fraud, integrity of lots of different kinds. It's not just in the scholarly space. That's true too about efficiency. Just taking those kind of everyday, ordinary tasks that that folks are doing and automating where we can. I mean, you can see across the sectors. Investments in automation, investments in, especially where AI can help us jump some steps, but humans always, of course, in the loop where we can. And I think workflows, that's another one that you can see across the sectors, is an investment in the user experience, whether that be author experience, whether that be the funder experience, whether that be an editor's experience, really looking at where the friction lies and where we can jump steps, in particular where we can use open and shared standards. So I'm not going to sing about it, Heather, but I do want to underscore metadata here. I heard that a lot yesterday, and we see that a lot in the Emerging 50 list. Folks are looking to leverage open standards, metadata standards, persistent identifiers. Those are ways that we can increase integrity, increase trust, enable automation, increase efficiency. So those were some of my takeaways.
Given the audience, I wasn't sure how this would go down, but I think one of the areas we see a lot of innovation in is so-called Web3, and I think the community that call themselves decentralized science. It's not public, but it's not a secret either, so it's worth mentioning that Holtzbrink, our parent company, Holtzbrink's publishing group, recently made a small investment into a company called DeSci Labs, which is, thank you. I'll keep an eye on you. You keep keep me right. Made an investment into a company called DeSci Labs, which is looking at the entire publishing workflow. I'm hesitant to discuss it because it conjures up words like blockchain and so on. But yeah, and exactly, I saw your reaction. And believe me, I went through that hype cycle as well. But there's a lot of clever people doing a lot of clever things there, and I think it's worth having a stake or placing a small bet on those teams, because I think interesting things will come out of it.
So for Wiley's sake, I mean, certainly a lot of focus on technology, but the trick, I think, is also thinking about what do you mean by integrity, for example. Integrity or lack thereof can come in many different forms. So it's also, to some degree, identifying the source, and how do you respond to that with technology in a nimble fashion. So some of it is catching things upstream earlier. Sometimes it is, can you leverage technology to know what you don't know, and how do you how can you use that as a tool for getting ahead of that? Something we also think about, in this world of increased move towards open access and public access mandates around the world. There are questions about what entities are best equipped. In a world where there are a lot of, monetized incentives for bad acts, and how do you counter that, and who has the ability and the scale to make those initial investments and anticipate and get out in front of, and again, increasingly sophisticated bad actors to ensure integrity, which of course is absolutely key in a whole bunch of domains.
From my perspective, I think one of the areas that really needs a little bit of focus, and some folks might be looking at it, is like business model modifications. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard about SaaS business models and product-led growth. Like every time I hear product-led growth, now if I take $1 from them, I could buy a plane ticket. I mean, it's really like important to think about when you are innovating, what is the business model that you're going to apply to it. A lot of discussion yesterday around the APC, and definitely that's a really interesting way to look at it. But what are the areas where you can actually create value for the supplier as well as the end user is what an innovation is required. And I think secondly, I feel that looking at some of the conversations around peer review and the integrity of data and all those areas, I feel that it's important that there is a standard that is set, like an impact factor, as a coalition, as all of you coming together as a community, building that standard that can help challenge any of those areas that might be looking a little off. So those are the areas that I feel are requiring a little bit more attention. And as far as technology is concerned, I think for the Digital Science and Wiley have been looking at acquiring a lot of companies and helping them scale. But the question really is that what is the value that the end user is getting? And we want to see that in terms of what could be, as a VC, one would look at the EBITDA or look at the ROI that's generated, and what is the area that, when you look at these numbers, then it becomes a different conversation, and what's the commercial aspect of any business. So I'm really interested in looking at these technologies becoming commercially viable so that they have the ability to create that market share that it deserves.
Sounds good. And sort of from a perspective of looking at new technologies and analyzing, it's not just the technologies, sometimes it's the people and the founders who have the vision and the foresight, right? And Steve, I think, Digital Science did a great job with its Catalyst grant program of building a pipeline of innovative sort of products and people, and I believe you're sort of relaunching some of that soon. So is there anything you want to say?
Yeah. Thanks for the nudge on that. I should have mentioned it earlier. So Catalyst Grant was something that we did from the beginning of the company. We turned it off in 2019 for various reasons. We wanted to reset how we approached Catalyst, but Catalyst was our early stage dragnet for any and all ideas. And by early stage, I mean pre-revenue, sometimes pre-code I did literally get a business plan on a napkin once as part of the catalyst. But it was very successful. We get up to 70 applications per round. We ran it twice a year. It was a grant, no strings attached for up to $25,000 per year. But we're bringing it back this year, but with a twist. And the twist is that we're turning it into more of a challenge format. And the reason we're thinking about doing that is because there are lots of issues that within publishing, but not just for us, not just in publishing, government funder and academic institutions, etc. But we see a lot of problems that we'd like the community to try and address. And that's all well and good, just saying, here's a problem and we'll give you some money if you solve it. But what we're doing in addition to that is we're sharing data, API access. We're really trying to enable people to give them the tools to do something impressive. And that's kind of tied into the AI conversation as well, because when we look at the AI marketplace, we were just talking, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of startups. I mean, I have a list of 500 plus generative AI companies that I'm trying to work my way through to see if there's anything there. Most of them are one-person companies, because you can be a one-person company these days. You can outsource just about everything, including writing the code. So anyway, going back to the point, the idea is that we're trying to find talent and ideas now rather than startups per se, looking for individuals and teams that are doing clever things, and then we'll figure out a way to work with them. So.
From the outsell perspective, I can share a little bit about how we generate that emerging 50 list, and that has to do with scoring 1 to 10 scale, a number of different data points. So the final list that you see are the highest scoring companies that analysts have identified as being highly scalable. They have the potential to grow. They have the potential to extend beyond maybe their initial entry point. Uniqueness, that they're doing something truly different, that they don't have an obvious direct competitor in the market. Market potential, again, around competition, but also what's the appetite and what's the saturation. And probably the most important, the one that has the most data points behind it, is around solving market needs, actually addressing pain points. So again, not innovation for innovation's sake, for the next flashy thing, but in that particular sector, which area can they actually move the needle? Do they have the potential to help increase trustworthiness, for instance, or improve the authorship process, whatever it may be. But I also want to give a shout out to what Deepika was saying earlier around go-to-market and the business model piece. Half of my life is outsell. The other half of my life is product development. And in that other half, I've used things like the business model canvas from Oppenheimer and others, business and market research folks, where you're essentially mapping the market need, the competitive landscape to your internal capacity, your assets, and really seeing, okay, is there a there there? Where are the gaps? Where are the opportunities? So lots of different frameworks I think you can bring.
I'd like to add to that. It's a good point. So what Letty just said is exactly how a VC will look at the potential investment. Idea needs to be breakthrough. I mean, at some point, if Airbnb was not it was not even a possibility. How can you go and sleep in someone else's house, right? Like, that was a breakthrough idea. PayPal was absolutely a breakthrough idea. Idea has to definitely be of significant importance. There has to be some breakthrough aspect to it, but then it's the entrepreneur, right? Like, that's very important. You need to have the courage. Okay, so point being that whether it doesn't need to be a Harvard graduate, but they definitely need a little bit of perseverance to go for it. And the market size matters, like whether we like it or not. OpenAI right now is 20 billion. Projected to grow to 500 billion. So there is a market. So obviously, so many people are trying to open companies because it's a potential big market size. And I think finally is the business model. You don't have to figure it out at the beginning or onset, but you have to keep working towards it, because whatever you think might be the potential business model, the market will dictate what they're going to be willing to pay for it. So you can kind of keep pivoting from that. So a lot of you probably have all those examples, but those are the areas that you're looking at when you're looking. So it's simple in terms of understanding, but yeah, it takes a little bit of a nerve to get it done.
So I'll just add one point. Is when we look at innovations and inorganic growth, one of the things we also think about is not just these discrete innovations, but how do they all fit together in a sort of more holistic way? How do you look at the ecosystem as a whole, soup to nuts, if you will? So looking at, for example, everything we do from upskilling and retraining in STEM education for it. So it's a little looking at it sort of almost more as a life cycle or an ecosystem approach, and so again, not just individual elements, but how might they fit together as a whole.
We're doing the interactive thing.
This is a very interesting panel. Congratulations to all of you. And as you were presenting your ideas, I recall that Adrian at some point said, do not forget there are people behind. So people can use but can also misuse. Up to what point are these innovations evaluated as to their potential for a misuse and causing harm?
Yeah, I'll bite. I think I certainly see that in the AI space. Right? I think we all, yeah. I mean, that's the obvious candidate in terms of misuse of large language models, hallucinations, all the things that come with that, and for the Scholar record. I think in terms of putting that to one side, unless that's where you want to get deeper, I think it's not something that we have as a separate line item on our due diligence. We do due diligence, and the risk, and it depends how you define the risk, where the edges are of that. But I think we rely on that as part of the assessment there. But it's a great point. I don't think it is something, the other panelists may have a different view, but it's certainly not something we pull out specifically.
I'd like to add, due diligence is absolutely a fantastic idea, Steve. But market corrects itself. Like if you've heard of recently what happened with Facebook, like the market in itself understands that the data was not being utilized as the way they would like to see. So, you see the market correction. That happened to Facebook. Something similar is happening to Google at this point of time. Because the advertising model just grew out of proportion, ads became really expensive. It was again for big bets with the big pockets. So how does the market itself has a potential to correct itself at times. So when things there is always that point at which thing will plateau, and if it doesn't go beyond that, what is called crossing the chasm, if you've heard of Jeffrey Moore, it comes to a point where it stops growing from that perspective.
So to my earlier point, I think about looking at things holistically. I think one of the challenges, of course, is that there's only so much predictive work you can do, or even if the market self-corrects, so to speak. I think about this in the integrity context, for example. There are all sorts of kind of exogenous, human behaviors, I think, to some degree. And you open up any kind of technology, and it probably will be some kind of way to abuse it, And I think about things as well, like, for example, there are the incentive structures in academia. And with smaller amounts of federal funding or funding for research, and sometimes that creates perverse incentives. And so when you introduce a technology that can allow someone to take advantage of that, see this quite a lot. But again, that speaks to the need to, of course, take the systems approach, right? And it has to be talking about tenure and promotion at institutions of higher education, equity, and the like. It's all of a piece to some degree.
Oh, we got a couple of questions here. Good. Let me do Anita first.
All right, this is not a softball question. Coming from the startup space, I'm a startup founder. And one of the things that I've heard from VCs over and over again is publishing is a tiny market. We're absolutely not interested. Furthermore, it moves at somewhere slower than glacial. Is that a thing? So I just do want to maybe throw this question out there. Publishers are really conservative. You guys are really conservative. And that's fine. Like we need integrity in the process, and we need all of that, and that's all understood. But when you go to VCs and their horizon is 6 months, and the horizon of getting a conversation with publishers is 6 months, it's there's a disconnect there, right? So, you know, coming from the panel, like, how do you deal with the fact that there is just, you know, I'm glad that you have some, you know, 500 one-person companies, you know, with scribbles on napkins, but there's probably 500 startups in the basement of my university. Like, there is just so many of these people, but almost none of them are actually dealing with anything publishing related. And I don't know why that is specifically, but I just would love to get the panel's understanding of, okay, there's this big disconnect. How have you guys addressed it? You know, what is the answer? Is there an answer? There could be no answer.
You must be very, very patient. No, Hannah and I were just talking about this on the break, so well timed. I think one of the things that's going on in our industry is the kind of weight and obligation of acting as stewards of the scientific record, of the scholarly record. I think that is one element of the conservative dynamic. Having worn hats from new product innovation to business development and market research and analysis, conversations do take a very long time in our industry. But I think that is potentially part of the risk assessment that we can make as we're looking at that too, is this is just a reality of where we are. And I think if we keep coming back to the why, we keep coming back to the whose life are we improving, whose workflow are we accelerating, you know, where are we solving problems, some of that long tail of getting conversations started proves itself out a little bit. You know, I think it gives us time to really put those ideas to the test to some degree. At least that's my first thought.
I totally understand your pain there. First of all, congratulations on your startup. So you're absolutely right. If you go to VC and show this as a market size, which is about 600 million, it won't be a big market, right? So I personally, when building RedLink, for example, my goal was to look at what can I create that can be applied to different other verticals. So it doesn't stick with one. So you can apply it to horizontally. I've heard conversations in this room, people who are looking at building technology that can solve other areas as well. It can have a little bit of a pivot, and going into another market could be a difficult entry point, but there are definitely parallels. This is why I keep saying that the business model innovation in the industry is absolutely key. One of the things that stagnates startup founders is the business model, the traditional business model. And I see that happening with open access. I see that happening with other solutions, but there needs to be a little bit of more fast acceleration. And what is the biggest change that probably you're pointing towards is the mindset shift, right? Like, how do you change that mindset, right? And that is the biggest challenge, and you're absolutely right, you're facing that. But as, like, in conversations like this, like literally with Adrian and with Scott, like here, we built certain things, and like all the portfolio companies were completely transparent, collaborating, but like there are people, you'll have to just find your tribe, you know, for innovation.
And perhaps the other point to that, I mean, it is well noted, and I've heard a similar sort of complaint or I guess accusation that it's hard for the publishing industry also to attract the best IT talent and tech talent, right? But, you know, I think if you look at perhaps Digital Science and Wiley's models, some of their innovations not only go for publishing, but it's the funder market, the institutional market, and others. And if those products can be used across those, the size is bigger, and then, you know, market demand. I mean, looking at the earlier slide on integrity and TNF's challenge with 180 integrity cases and then 2,000, that's shouting out for some sort of need of help and support in a way. But Angela, I think you had a question.
Thanks. Hi. Angela Cochran from ASCO. I spent the first half of this week at the ISMPP meeting, and that's the International Society of Medical Publishing Professionals. It's very strange if you've not been there, because it's basically all of the publication planners from pharma and the companies that pharmaceuticals hire to help write papers that they then submit. So it's medical writers and publication planners from pharma. And while the theme of this meeting was all about patient first and plain language summaries and all of that, the overriding theme in listening to every single session was about AI. There were keynotes in AI. I was a speaker on a panel about the publisher perspective in using AI. And the pharmaceutical companies, as I'm sure Steve knows, Digital Science has been doing a lot of work with Pfizer, they're already developing the AI models for how to create more manuscripts and how to get more information out quickly to wider audiences. And every one of them, because there were like 3 publishers that went to this meeting, they would then like all turn to one of us and say, and how are you going to accommodate that? And there were, some discussions around, like in 5 years or less, there will be credible generative AI written scientific medical papers. There will be figures, we talked about the integrity software that can find where a figure maybe has been sliced. But if it's an AI generated figure, those markers won't be there for generating that kind of fraud. But that the argument was that now is the time for us to start building what the guardrails would be for this inevitable AI future. And they were all a little taken aback that as an industry, we hadn't quite figured out what those guardrails would be yet. And I'm like, dude, ChatGPT just became like a big thing a couple of weeks ago. But they're definitely looking to the publishing industry for some guidance on that. So I guess I want to go a little deeper into, as Steve mentioned, generative AI and what that means, but also what you're seeing on your end for some of the startups.
Yeah, I'll defer to Wiley from the publisher angle because we're not a publisher of Digital Science, but I do see, and we have numerous conversations with publishers, and you're right, we are in a bit of an arms race when it comes to AI-generated content and AI-detected content as we move forward. But my own personal view is that, and certainly with conversations with the likes of Springer Nature, who obviously we're quite close to, but not just those, they are looking seriously at large language models. They're looking at questions like, do we give OpenAI our content? OpenAI pretty much probably has your content already. I think that's an open question as well about what they do and don't have. But I think building your own models, models as a service, I think is a business model we were talking about earlier that I think is fascinating, i.e. giving to the community large language models that are unique, because OpenAI is great, but it's general. It's just, it knows a lot about everything, but not in a deep way. And certainly at Digital Science, we're working with internally with our own language models and looking at ways to release those to the community as well. But yeah, I do think publishing is slow to react in this area, but I think I see a lot of people nodding, so I think that's a good sign in that they know it, so they are reacting.
Yeah, I'll just say certainly this has occasioned many conversations within Wiley. One point I would just raise, I think everybody's having similar conversations, this is also a good time, I think, for the publishing industry or scholarly communications industry, not just to think about, looking internally and how do we grapple with these issues or what is good and bad or somewhere in between. But this is also a time when governments around the world and others are also looking at this. And so this is an opportunity, at least I would posit that it is one potentially, for once we have a sense to engage in those conversations, because that will also shape, U.S. Biden administration now has an AI Bill of Rights, and so I think that's happening across the globe. And so it is important, I think, that now is a good time for us to at least start engaging that conversation and bring our perspectives to bear on those issues.
I'll just add, it's not all doom and gloom. I think there are some publishers that are very proactive, and this kind of sounds congratulatory, it's not meant to, but one of our companies, Rightful, works with ACS, and I know there are ACS people in the audience, and ACS have done amazing things with the Rightful tool beyond what the Rightful founders even thought about at the time, doing automated manuscript categorization, looking at the language quality, post-copy editing, all sorts of very, very clever things embedded into their workflow. So AI is not just a threat, it's an opportunity. Yeah.
I would just add one more thing to that, which is Image Twin was one company on the Outsell Emerging 50, in part because of that, solving real-world problems and getting into image fraud detection. I believe their system is trained primarily on life science content, but that's a really good example of, a startup that publishers can experiment with. But while the list has historically focused on new companies under 3 million, less than 5 years kind of size companies, innovation can come from anywhere, So one of the things that I've seen work really well with a number of publishers is creating an innovation budget, right? Protecting some budget, protecting some resource where folks are dedicated to fast experimentation, learning, and pivoting. So that's another way of looking at the speed piece, potentially.
Heather Staines from Delta Think, and I also do outreach for Get FTR and Seamless Access. So yesterday's session at the end of the day on open access policies around the world, I was hoping to ask, and we ran out of time, but infrastructure was mentioned by most of our speakers. JStage in Japan, Cielo in Latin America, PubMed Central, and I spent a number of years in the infrastructure space, and startups are great and flashy, and they attract a lot of attention and investment, but how can we ensure that large infrastructure projects continue to get investment, continue to get, updated so that they will accommodate, new funder mandates and things like that? And it may be in addition to an innovation budget, there needs to be some sort of infrastructure support budget. But I just wanted, it's kind of the other end of the size spectrum, but how can we encourage that? How can we make sure that that type of innovation, can be sustainable?
Yeah, you mean not all nonprofit volunteer efforts, NISO, ORCID, et cetera. I just jotted that down on the sort of methods side of things when we're thinking about innovation. That's actually one that we haven't been tracking in detail, and I think it's a really important one. It goes back to my point earlier around persistent IDs and metadata, and having those well-established standards that we can all build on and build automation into. So yeah, I agree. That's something we need to figure out.
Yeah, and just flagging one that I've been part of a community group and pilot the OA Switchboard. I think he's doing some really great work. But maybe Chris wants to say something from the ORCID standpoint, or no? I don't know. How do you see like your partners and members helping you innovate and support, or what else would you want?
Hi, Chris Shillam from ORCID. Thank you. That was a really good question. I think ORCID is in a good place now. We have sustainable business model. It took us 10 years to get there, and that was the focus of the organization for 10 years. And I think one of the challenges and also opportunities is that there are not patterns for new organizations who are starting up useful and valuable infrastructures to follow. And it would be good. We published kind of a little write-up of our history last year with our 10-year anniversary, partly because we wanted to share what we learned, what worked, what didn't work. I also think that applying commercial principles is really important in running infrastructure projects, right? You can't run these things as hobbies. You need talented, experienced staff. You need people who know how to develop business models. And there are a lot of people trying to build really useful bits of infrastructure on the basis of kind of part-time hobbyism. And sadly, a lot of these things don't come to fruition because they can't get to the point of sustainability. There is, many of you probably saw Roger Schoenfield's article in Scholarly Kitchen this week. Ithaca doing a big research project on infrastructure. It'd be interesting to see what they come up with. And there's also, I'm sure many of you know, an organization called IOI, Invest in Open Infrastructure, run by Caitlin Faney, and they're doing a lot of work on particularly what they're trying to do is create more understanding among people with money, funders, about the need to support infrastructure and how they might go around doing that.
Thank you. I'll speak not as a profit founder, but as a scientist in this case. I think we are demonizing AI because when children learn to speak, they imitate their parents, their teachers, their friends. They're plagiarizing, you may say. When I was learning how to write research papers, I was imitating my scientific advisor, the other papers I read, and slowly developed this. ChatGPT, or any large language model, does exactly the same, and for good reason. It's the same neural network, right? They just managed to scale it up to it. So the question is not whether a paper has been written by ChatGPT. Like when I am as a professor force my graduate student to write a paper and then sign it, I'm doing exactly the same as if I'm using ChatGPT, but it's even more human, right? Because the student does not suffer that much. So I don't see the problem. The problem is not there. The problem is how do we know that this research is actually correct? And I think the only way to make the research correct is to create a system of reproducibility. I write an original research and I publish it in Nature. Now, I come and I repeat the research which was published in Nature. Who will publish me in Nature? I will be rejected at the editor level. They say, it's not original anymore. We already know that X is equal to Y. Why? Only when I, or even 10 people like me, reproduce some research, it actually became, especially at the groundbreaking level, it actually became important. So not only top journals should not reject reproducibility, they should invite people. There should be such a thing not as a peer review, but as an invited reproducibility review. Group X did some research. Group Y repeated it on our request. It's actually very honorable, right? Because they consider you good enough to repeat the groundbreaking research. So this should be even at least at the same level of importance. You can put it on your CV saying, okay, they invited me 5 times to reproduce other people's research. This will solve a lot of problems about peer reviewing, because this is analog of peer reviewing, completely open, much more thorough. But of course, this can only come from publishers, right? I mean, people cannot do it themselves and convince the publishers to do it. I think this will be our only counter strike against AI, paper mills, etc. At least for the research which really matters. There is a level of research which is not even wrong, and there, whether it's generated by humans or by ChatGPT, I don't think anybody cares. But for the top-level research, for those which can be important, I think publishing companies should really move in the direction of creating ordering reproducibility studies immediately, on the spot. And then there are options and options. Publishing them side by side, not releasing the first one until the second one is released. I mean, we can discuss it. It actually is not even the whole publishing story, because you come to me and say, reproduce the research, and I tell you, yeah, but I don't have money to do it right now. So it should be a connection between a funding for a quick, targeted funding. I don't try the application. I say, I agree. I received funding for 6 months. I deliver the result. And publishers. And I think this will create a completely different ecosystem, which can be abused because it's a game theory. So wherever there is a reward, there is a way to abuse the system. But I think it will be a completely different level of scrutiny, of reproducibility, and of peer review in general.
I'd like to just touch on Angela's point. It's really important that that people are thinking about putting a framework together. But the real question that I want to bring forward is, the end user of the ChatGPT or OpenAI is not going to be the publisher as of right now. Why are we not bringing the conversation to the people who are consuming that? Now, for example, if it takes my research paper to be written 10 times shorter period, I'm going to use it. So how do you adopt that in a way? So it has to be one from the perspective of the end user and what makes his life easier, which actually adds value to you as well because you get more papers. Second perspective is at the source level. What is the content that the AI models are consuming, which is definitely in some the power of that lies in all the people in this room. So if they are consuming the right model, the output will be pretty much in line with that. So can we, so I think that is what the conversation needs to have more user base and different mindset looking from the other side. That will create the right framework and bringing that into conversation.
I'd like to use this as a chance to inject a little HSS into STM. It's always a bugaboo of mine. Causal Maps is a startup that was on the Emerging 50 list. Actually, I believe a Sage Catalyst startup, if I'm remembering correctly. LLM AI-based text analysis tool for qualitative researchers, where the idea of research being correct or reproducible for many methods is not applicable. And so I just want to throw an air of caution to the assumption that LLMs or AI in general can prove that research is accurate. That simply doesn't apply across all fields of study. So take a look at Causal Maps if you haven't already. It's a pretty exciting tool.
All right, I think I'm going to wrap it up now. Hopefully you've found this stimulating and thought-provoking. Oleg, perhaps you can talk to Tim from Data Seer over there. I think you might have a good idea together. I don't know. But please continue the discussion, and we'd love to hear your feedback. And thanks to all the panelists for coming and sharing their thoughts.